Okay, so Jen, I have another joke for you.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
What do you call a happy cowboy?
A happy cowboy. Not a cowboy anymore.
A jolly rancher.
A jolly rancher. That's funny.
I figure I'll keep those going for a road trip series. Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. Before we get into the main topic that I know you guys are anxious to kind of hear about, I do want to call out another, it looks like an updated review from a friend of ours, Doug McLiverty. Great podcast on the Lincoln conspiracy trial. He was a big fan of that episode, our episode a couple podcasts ago. He said, "Thank you for another great episode. You can always teach me something new. I watched the 2010 movie Conspirator, and it was wonderful. Never would have known about it without your podcast." So if folks remember, and they had listened to us talk about Grant Hall, we talk about the movie Conspirator. You talk about it. I haven't seen it, but you've seen it, and you kind of spoke highly of it. And there's a couple of people even on Instagram that said it was pretty good.
Yeah, it really centers on Mary Surratt. Robin Wright plays her. And it's directed by Robert Redford. It's a good movie.
Yeah. So that's fun. It's always fun to hear from folks who are listening to the podcast. We love getting those reviews because that's kind of the best form of feedback that we can get, and it really does help us grow.
Yes.
One day, I hope to get that podcast featured on some new and upcoming, Apple Podcast section. It's very difficult to do, but podcasts really do help that. So if you listen, we really do appreciate the reviews either here or on Spotify. I think Spotify, it's just stars. There's no real comments, but thank you for the reviews out there. Thank you so much. Buffalo Bill Cody was a legendary American frontiersman, a showman and entrepreneur who became famous for his Wild West shows, showcasing the romanticized image of the American West. His larger-than-life persona and captivating performances made him a cultural icon of the late 19th century, leaving a lasting legacy as an emblem of American frontier spirit. And while many of us only remember Cody for his traveling Wild West show that entertained crowds all over the world, don't forget that Buffalo Bill Cody was also the real deal. So, Jen, let's talk a little bit about this legendary Western frontiersman, Buffalo Bill Cody. So where are we starting with him today?
Well, we went to visit his museum and grave outside of Denver, Colorado, in Golden, Colorado. And he's on Lookout Mountain, and the address is Lookout Mountain Road. And we went out there because Buffalo Bill Cody, if you're a fan of any Westerns, even today, if you like 1883, if you like Yellowstone, if you like Longmire, or anything that even like centers around the Western, it might even Mandalorian might even be a good, because it's like a modern day Western.
Very much so.
You have Buffalo Bill Cody to thank for this, and you might be like, well, why? It's because he made this transition from the real West to entertaining people about stories of the West.
Yeah, and when you say the real West, and in the video that we made and we put out, and it's doing decently because people are interested in that Western history. I mean, he was out there doing it. The Pony Express, and shooting buffalo, and scouting, and also like
this transitional time of the West.
That's right.
So basically this territorial Western expansion, this whole people settling, homesteading, he's pinnacle in this entire time. So Cody is born in 1846 in Iowa, and his father is from Canada. His mother is a Quaker, and they don't believe that he was raised that way, but he's the only boy in their family. He has 4 sisters. And they moved to Kansas when he's 7 years old. Again, his father has very much of this entrepreneur kind of spirit, the settler kind of spirit. And in Kansas, it's a area at the time, when you think he's moving there in the 1850s, where Kansas is under turmoil of whether it's going to be a free state or a slave state.
That's right. You talked a little bit about Bleeding Kansas.
Bleeding Kansas, there's this fight in the state because there are some people who want it to be a slave state so they can have free labor and start farming with free labor. And there's some people who want it to be a free state because enslavement is wrong and you can pay your laborers, which are usually, your poor whites, you can pay them instead of using enslaved labor. And so Cody's father is on the side of anti-slavery. And he goes to a rally where he basically insults people who are pro-slavery. And somebody is in the crowd with a Bowie knife and stabs him twice. Now, he doesn't die at that moment, but he will succumb to those injuries later in life. So Cody becomes the man of the house when he's 11 years old.
Yeah.
So his father will die when he's 11. And so what does Cody do? I mean, he's in Kansas. He has a mother and 4 sisters. He does what his father did. He helps with this expansion. And so people who usually took an Oregon Trail or were trail runners, across America needed protection. They needed horses.
Yeah, they just needed help.
They needed help. So at 11 years old, he became what they call a horse runner, which not only are you getting horses, but you're running messages from the person in the very front of the wagon train to the person at the very back of the wagon train. And you're kind of helping the people who this is their business of getting these wagon trains out there. So
and think about it. For that kind of role, what better role for, an 11, 12, 13-year-old kid?
Yeah.
With all this energy.
Yeah, exactly. Becoming a young man.
Yeah.
And early on, he's proven to be a very accurate shooter. He's very accurate with his rifle. So they notice this about him from a young age, that he can shoot game and he can help feed people and he doesn't take a lot of waste bullets. And so it's not long before they also see his advantage. At about 15, 16, he becomes a Pony Express rider. So again, the same kind of business model, the same kind of men are trying to run messages, right? Same thing, the mail, and here's someone who's proven themselves on the wagon train to run messages. An
experienced rider can take care of himself.
And accurate with a rifle. And so they use him, a kind of a precursor to the Pony Express. He does some trails along the Pony Express, but even before the Pony Express. So he's one of those very front runners, right? So the real deal. We talked about this. And so this is 1860 when he's really working for the Pony Express. He's 16 years old. So when you think the Civil War is about to start, he's too young to really join the Civil War. Yeah. So you don't really see him in the Civil War till 1863.
Yeah, till later.
When he's 18, 19 years old. And he becomes a scout.
Yep.
Just like what he will do later in life. A scout, go out in front, scout out the area. Where's the enemy? He can get in, get out. He lives off the land. He's a frontiersman. He's very good at hiding his tracks.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, for any general or unit that is kind of looking for someone like that, he's plug and play.
Yeah.
Right. That he comes in. He's like, he fought for the Union side.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So he comes into this unit, and they're like, oh, you do this, that, and the other. He's like, yeah, I can be a scout. Great. Go, scout over here and tell us what you see, and does it, no issues, right?
Yeah.
And if you're successful, then leadership is like, perfect. This is all you're going to do.
Yes. And, he doesn't wear the uniform because he's wearing his his rawhide, he's wearing his skins and stuff because he's just a man of the land. And this is where he meets Hickok for the first time.
Oh, he meets him in the Army.
In the Army. And Hickok's 9 years older than him. And Hickok is also a scout. So Hickok is also very good at this. Again, frontiersman, good at living off the land, hunting people, knowing what people are. And so they become friends. And it's during this time, right after the Civil War, that he is hired by the Kansas Pacific Railroad in 1866 to hunt buffalo for the railroad. So he becomes a military scout on the side as they venture out into the West. Think of Custer and everyone who's kind of venturing out after the Civil War. And he helps feed the railroad. So they're trying to build a railroad across the United States to connect.
And this is where he earns his name because he's so good at what he does.
Yes, between 1867 and 1868, he kills over 4,000 buffalo.
That's crazy.
And he's actually, somebody challenges him to see who can kill more buffalo. And he beats that person by 10. And the reason why is because a lot of people hunted buffalo from the back of the herd, scaring the herd, and then whoever the low, the slower ones is the one they would kill. Cody goes out in front.
Oh, really?
And hits the herd from the front. And then it kind of pushes them to the side where he can just shoot alongside of them.
As they're walking, as they're charging by.
They're running by, so he can hit them, and he just goes back and gets them.
That seems like a much more dangerous way to hunt buffalo.
It's a very dangerous way to hunt buffalo. And if you see in our video, first of all, we stand by a stuffed buffalo, so you can see how big they are.
Huge.
Plus buffalo charge.
Yep.
They're just like bulls. So when you think of a bull that's going to charge you with their horns, a buffalo will charge you when they're scared. Listen up, Yellowstone visitors.
What do all the T-shirts say? Don't pet the fluffy cows.
Don't pet the fluffy cows.
That's right.
Buffaloes charge. And so he has to ride basically alongside of them and shoot them. And again, he's accurate. You have to get close to get through a buffalo hide, and it's basically like shooting a deer under the shoulder. But he's so accurate at it. And he also favors, I read, instead of like a quick action kind of weapon, he favors like a bigger barreled weapon.
Oh.
So he does want the
get him with the one shot rather than needing two or something like that.
Because he knows he's very accurate.
Yeah.
And again, he's so good. He gets paid a lot of money for this. He's able to support his family this whole time. He does become man of the house and takes care of his family. And he's paid a lot of money to kill these buffalo to feed the railroad workers. And he's very good about taking care of people who work for him. So anyone who's helping him, he's also compensating them.
And now I think you even said it in the video, a little bit later in life, he actually expresses regret for killing so many buffalo.
He does, because, at the time, there was a lot of buffalo on the plains, but in these years from the 1860s to the 1880s to the 1890s, you're going to pretty much decimate the buffalo bison population and almost to extinction.
That's crazy in just a couple years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's twofold. There's a lot of thoughts about that the military did it on purpose to wipe out the food source for the American Indians. And so they would just kill buffalo. But Cody ate the buffalo. And so he felt bad when it eventually came to the point where you're down to a couple hundred buffalo left. And thank God, there were these people who protected them. And now today, even the herds are reestablished. But he did feel bad about that because he did appreciate, what the buffalo was.
Yeah, and the museum we visited, right? And I guess that's kind of what this video is kind of predicated on. We were up there, in Denver visiting friends, went up to Golden, which is just outside of Denver, up and then up in the hills of Lookout Mountain. We went up to the museum, and the museum does a really good job of taking you through his life and through these different stages of his life and really showcasing how he was, where he came from, how he was the real deal, and then what he did transitioning into kind of the show business.
Yes.
It was great.
And I think, so the museum starts in 1921. So Cody dies in 1917. So when you really think the museum starts 4 years after his death.
Wow, I don't think I realized that.
It's very accurate then in a portrayal because they get a lot of artifacts right away. As you know, his show coat is there. They got a piece pie of some Sitting Bull. They have a headdress from Sitting Bull there.
He was living there. That's the area where he was living at the time.
Yeah, they have his Medal of Honor there. So the story is pretty seamless after he passes to tell the story. But I think that the museum does a good job of is showing you that Buffalo Bill Cody is not just a story. He's not just a character. He is this person who did do these things during this time in American history of the West, and then transition to the show of it.
Yeah, and kind of telling his story numerous times, which when you tell a story enough times, even you and I embellish stories time after time after time after time. And someone like that, when that's your business for many years after getting out of the business of being a scout and, hunting buffalo and all that stuff, like things are, will tend to get a little bit more grandiose.
Sure. You can imagine Sitting Bull wore his headdress for every show. right? A chief is not going to wear his headdress
Right.
every day, all day, right? But he's going to wear it for every show because it's a piece, like it's a very flamboyant piece of their costume. But in 1868, he goes back into the military. So he's shooting for the buffalo. He goes back into the military in 1868 because this is when they start scouting out for the Indian reservations.
Yeah.
This is when they start the Indian War. So if you think of the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, this is the time when Cody's coming back into military service. And this is when he actually gets his Medal of Honor. And he gets his Medal of Honor because this is the time when there is a lot of uproar, instability between the white settlers and the American Indians who are being pushed off their land. Plus, the American Indians tribes are being pushed together that don't want to be together.
Right.
And this is what happens in Bighorn. And so the Indian tribes want their own spaces as well. They want to be their own autonomous groups. And so you get a lot of this back and forth of, massacring this settlement, massacring this American Indian tribe, massacring this settlement. So Cody is brought in to help stop some of that, and again to scout that out, and he ends up killing some American Indians who were there to kill him, and he ends up, and I think he takes out 12. He's with two other men. They take out 12, and so he gets the Medal of Honor for this. Now, the Medal of Honor was taken away because of this, and then it was reinstated in the late 90s because
I think what I read when I was putting the video together was because he was a scout, so technically a civilian, they reviewed these Medal of Honors, I think, I don't know, 10, 20 years after the fact or something like that. And so there was a few scouts that actually had there's a couple others like him that had medals of honor. They were removed. And then what was it, it was when Reagan?
Yeah, I think it was Cody's great grandson or someone who who made a petition to a senator in Wyoming. And the senator in Wyoming went to
the White House.
I mean, it probably was Reagan.
I'm pretty sure it was Reagan because it was
and he was like, give him back.
And of course, Reagan would be like, yeah, give him medals of honor back. But they actually they did kind of award them to them. So that was kind of.
So I say this because it's in 1869, at 23 years old, that he's going to meet Ned Buntline. So this is pretty significant. Ned Buntline is the writer, is the reporter who sees these great Western stories and wants to put them in the Chicago Weekly News. He wants to put them in the New York Weekly. He wants to write these stories and
the dime novels.
The dime novels. And Cody is the perfect character. It's the perfect person to write.
Almost unbelievable.
Yes, to write
what he's done.
These stories about. And so he writes this really good book called Buffalo Bill, King of the Bordermen. So, like the border. And he writes this book. And what's great about Cody is the same year in December of 1872, he goes to Chicago and performs this on the stage. Tells the story. He's able to sit and read the story. And then, like you said, he probably embellishes or stands up.
Sure, you read the story enough times, you don't need to read it anymore.
And then he kind of and so people love this theatric of learning about the Wild West from a man who really did these things in the Wild West.
And I think it was Ned Buntline who technically gave him, kind of cemented his name as Buffalo Bill.
Yes. I mean, because it was a good nickname.
Yeah, it's kind of perfect, mnemonic,
Yeah.
Easy to remember.
Yeah.
And so from there, I think if I remember right, Ned Buntline wrote a few of these, kind of wrote some more because they got popular. And then that was the early stages of kind of this transition.
So this is like the 1870s, and he's going to invite Hickok to join him. He wants to invite a lot of his friends to join him because it helps tell the story. Plus, he's like, look at what we can do. The West is getting settled, and there's now, let's see if we can not only educate people about the West, but maybe we can use what we've learned and make some money off of it. But Hickok hates it. Hickok hates standing in front of people. He hides behind the scenery. He actually shot a spotlight that was on him. He shot it. And so Cody sees right away, okay, maybe this isn't for you.
Yeah. Well, and that's funny. I hadn't heard that bit about, shooting the spotlight that's on him. But, there's a lot of these men who were living out in the West for such a long time, I mean, true frontiersmen, just kind of out on their own or maybe with friends or, riding with a wagon train or something like that, being in a situation like that where all of a sudden now you're transported into constant crowds, I can see how that would just be overwhelming for someone who was never
around so many people.
Exactly.
And you have a lot of freedom to act how you want to act. And now you kind of have to have a little more decorum.
And this is where Buffalo Bill Cody really stands out.
So this is of 1880, and 1883, he's going to found the Buffalo Bill Wild West show. And think of this as like a circus. Think of this like a circus, but with the West as the story. And that's when he's going to hire Annie Oakley and Sitting Bull. And he does this, a couple years later, he'll do this Wild West and the Congress of Rough Riders of the World. So he wants to showcase cowboys of the world, and who are these Rough Riders? Who are these lawmen or anti-lawmen of all across the globe?
It was really neat in the museum, that was up on Looking Mountain, just outside of Golden. In the museum, they have a bunch of those old posters, right? And one of the things they said in there was that at certain points throughout his kind of showmanship career, Buffalo Bill Cody was so famous that all the posters said was, "I am coming." Mm-hmm. And that's it. And people knew what he looked like, and they knew what that meant. That's how famous his show was. And one of the things that I really enjoyed, and you pointed it out well when you start talking a little bit about diversity and kind of, he wants equality for all the people in his show and everything like that, was all these posters are not just a bunch of white cowboys, right? It's gauchos down from Mexico and Arabic riders and women and Indian.
He has Mongols, like people from Mongolia.
It was really neat. So I can only imagine, and they do have very late footage. I show in the video, the like 1908 type footage. I mean, they have like elephants in the show.
Yeah. So this is people's taste of the world,
right?
So we talked about the circus before on one of our episodes. We talked about Dan Rice and how this is how people of America before radio, before television, get a taste of what's out there. And here he is bringing it to you. He's bringing not only the West of America, but he's bringing all these different kind of cowboys of the world. So you get a taste of elephants, you get a taste of seeing people from different countries. And Cody, it's important to Cody, again, from a young age, to share the wealth. So he makes sure people are paid equally. Women are paid equally, people of color are paid equally. And I know someone had commented, well, Cody doesn't care about diversity, that's a today thing. It's before that. This is a precursor to that. He's not interested in diversity, he's interested in people in equality. And
they may not have called it that, but he would have said like, hey, these people were in my show. I'm not going to not pay people, right? Just because they're different than me or because Sitting Bull was a Native American or something like that. So,
and I also think this is also a smart businessman because you're going to get a good performance out of people if people are being paid.
Absolutely.
And they have job satisfaction, right? We talk about this all the time. You have job satisfaction, you're going to put on a good show. And that's the most important thing. And what this museum has that I love are these colorful posters, these propaganda posters, just like the circus, that would come into town before you would come into town, and they're larger than life. And Cody traveled the world.
Yeah, I mean, legitimately the world. Didn't he perform like in the Colosseum in Rome?
Yes, and he performed for Queen Victoria.
That's crazy.
It was amazing. He went over to Europe. He performed for Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria gave him a desk. Like Mark Twain was jealous of how much popularity Buffalo Bill Cody had. And you can think of Mark Twain, who was well known. Cody was known by everybody. And he brought the show everywhere. He traveled. There's a book there at the museum, and you can look to see if your town
I didn't get a chance to look through it.
But he came to every town we've been in with the military. He has been there.
Wow.
And that was pretty interesting. Now, there are some states that aren't states at the time.
Sure.
But you can look and see if he came to like the territory, maybe where you live. But Cody, and I'm not talking just once to these cities. Like he's been there a couple times. So this show was a consistent traveling show. and pretty much like a circus, probably doing 2 days, moving on, 2 days, moving on. And it would kind of travel before everybody who was the showcasers would get there. So, he was very, very popular. And again, just really making a name for himself all over and traveling all over. And then, as he gets a little later in life, that's when you start to see the movie films of him.
That was fun. And I actually wasn't expecting to be able to find that. But when we were in the museum, they actually have some stuff playing on a loop. Because if you think about, it was some of our other videos, we talk about the World's Fairs, right? And so that's the very early 1900s, 1901, 2, 3, 4, right? When they have, photographs are becoming more used, and then all of a sudden they start figuring out basic video, film.
Sure.
And so they start filming some of the shows.
It's Edison Studios invited Buffalo Bill and his show to be filmed in the early silent film called Buffalo Bill.
And that's actually where I found the clips. It's labeled as such.
Yes. Yeah. And he was part of the World's Fair in Chicago. He meets the Pope. He met Queen Victoria. Mark Twain commented, "It's often said on the other side of the water that none of the exhibitions which we send to England are purely and distinctly American. If you will take the Wild West show over there, you can remove that reproach." That's what he said.
Interesting.
So the Wild West brought a exotic foreign world to life for its European audiences. It gave them a glimpse of the fading American frontier. And that's interesting because what you're going to get in return at the time is you get Dickens, who wants to come to the West, and you get Oscar Wilde, who wants to come to the West, because this is a fading American frontier. But they're learning about it from Cody.
Yeah.
So Cody is bringing it to all these places around the world. Like, this is what America is basically overcoming, the wildness of it. And people want to see it before it goes away.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found interesting, kind of as Buffalo Bill Cody, he had his show for quite some time and made tons of money, but he was not the best businessman. He kept trying to invest his money afterwards and just not being successful. He tried to retire once or twice. Yeah,
so he tried to buy a ranch in Nebraska. That was unsuccessful. He tried Cody, Wyoming.
Okay.
Right. So he establishes Cody, Wyoming, and he tries to bring water up there, and he tries to, just establish a life up there. And again, then he starts to see it being exploited. He starts to see the people coming in and taking the coal and things like that. So one thing for Cody, I think he sees is he starts to really see appreciation for the Western culture, but he sees it change dramatically during his life.
Yeah.
So he sees the West one way, he lives the West one way, and then it completely changes during his lifetime.
That really is a massive shifting point for the country, right? Mm-hmm. Think about, he lived through the Civil War. Yeah. And then he lived through, the turn of the century. And the turn of the century really is kind of that newer industrial revolution for the U.S., and he passes away just before World War I.
Yeah, his show is basically sold off. He again, it's a circus. And so I would think you're basically just breaking even because you're paying people, you're moving things, you're kind of keeping up with the times, and then just, it's hard to make a profit. And so his show is sold off. He goes bankrupt. He's sold off. He has to perform in some shows as part of his contract. And then he just gets sick. And this
is later in life. Yeah.
And so in 1917, he's told at the beginning of the year, he's told he has 2 weeks to live. And he's in Colorado. So he makes it to his sister's house in Denver, Colorado. And there's an Instagram of me going to the house. It's at 2932 Lafayette Street in Denver. It's still there. And he makes it to his sister's house where he dies January 10th of 1917. And he gets baptized the day before he dies. Yeah. And he's with his wife.
And it was like there was a massive crowd that came to his funeral.
Sure. Yeah. Well, he, again, this is January. So he goes into the rotunda at the Capitol. He's friends with the governor of Colorado, and people have really appreciated what he meant to the West. And so 25,000 people will visit him lying in state in the rotunda. And then, of course, they're going to wait to bury him because it's winter.
Yeah, the ground's frozen
in Colorado. But on his deathbed, he tells his wife that he wants to be buried at Overlook Mountain. Most people thought he was going to be buried in Cody, Wyoming, his namesake. But he says to her he wants that. And other people heard him say it too. And because of that, when she buries him on June 3rd, 1917, she will open his coffin because people will be complaining, why is he being buried here? I thought it was supposed to be Cody. And she goes, this is what he wanted. These were his last wishes. His sister will pick out the plot area and Lookout Mountain. And then he's buried there. And his wife will join him 4 years later in 1921. So they're buried side by side. And it's after she's buried there that this whole controversy around Cody, Wyoming really picks up.
Oh, just because she's gone and
no one can really confirm what he said. And then his daughter chooses to be buried in Cody, Wyoming.
Oh, interesting.
And she's a real proponent of my dad wanted to be buried in Cody, Wyoming. So Cody, Wyoming plays these games of we'll pay anybody $10,000 to dig up his body and bring it back to Cody, Wyoming. And there's claims that somebody did do it, and he's buried on the mountain there in Cody, Wyoming. But if you go to the grave in Lookout Mountain, he's buried under concrete.
Yeah.
And he's buried around a fence. So there is no reason to believe that his body isn't still there in at Lookout Mountain.
But again, that just speaks to the popularity of how popular it was. Even at the time, he was such a massive draw and so publicly well known.
Yeah, I mean, there's arguments to say that he was the most famous person at the turn of the 20th century.
Yeah.
So there's 80,000 visitors will visit the Buffalo Bill Museum and grave in Golden, Colorado. I will say that the kids loved it.
Oh, it was such a good museum. If you're in that area, you need to go up there. It's not far outside of Golden.
You don't even know you're really outside of Denver.
Yeah.
And you have a beautiful lookout, a great picture spot, great picturesque location.
I kept finding like engagement photos online. Every time I was trying to look for photos, I kept finding there's all these couples that get engaged
it's
there.
So beautiful. And the kids, so they have like fake horses that the kids can ride, and they have cowboy hats that you can put on and wear. And so the kids really had a great time. And I don't know if they quite appreciated who Buffalo Bill Cody was, but they appreciated being able to play with all those things in the museum. So that's really great for kids.
Yeah. They did a really good job. It was very fun to do. And I so enjoyed going out there, not just because we were west and closer to kind of, where my roots are, but also because we really were seeing this kind of larger than life character in his own museum, and kind of learning about him was just fascinating. I think for folks nowadays, if you ever kind of played Cowboys and Indians when you're growing up, some piece of you is thinking, is doing that because of what Buffalo Bill Cody did.
I think the biggest message you should get from Buffalo Bill Cody, and I hope we explain in this podcast, is he really went from adversary to advocate.
Yeah.
He really went from a person who was part of this Western expansion and saw the American Indians as an adversary, and then really learned to become an advocate for all of those people who helped to make the American West what it was and what it is today.
Well, again, thank you for everyone who's listening to the Talk with History podcast. If you want to support the podcast, there's a couple things that you can do. So we talk about reviews, and I kind of foot stomp the reviews because they really do help, and we really love just getting that feedback. But you can also support us over at talkwithhistory.com. If you want to leave like $2, buy us a coffee. If you want to, say, here's $5. We're thinking about membership stuff in the future. I don't really know where that's going to go yet. But if you want to support the show, the best two ways is kind of visit the website, talkwithhistory.com, or share this podcast with a fellow history nerd, history buff out there, because we do rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.